Created in the 1980s and defined much later, roguelike is a popular genre of video games, especially as of recent times. Its success even today can be largely attributed to game design and mechanics that encourage repeated playthroughs or runs, utilizing procedural generation of environments and random outcomes to keep each of those runs feeling fresh. It's not just plain RNG like these days that I often find is put in place to frustrate you towards a provided solution, often in the form of microtransactions like XP doublers and boosters. I'm not taking an early dig at Warframe here, it's just that the recent Duviri Paradox expansion, which was touted as a sort of open-world roguelike form of the game, encouraged me to actually delve into the world of roguelikes and discover what an effective implementation of roguelike elements would or should look and feel like. Did Digital Extremes get it right with the Duviri Paradox, or is it just the same old formula of Warframe repackaged into another open arena with even more buffs and the same old repetitive grind? Some disclaimers to set expectations right before we get started. I am by no means a video game expert or accomplished game journalist. I've just been playing games on a computer, arguably a little too long for my own good. This video is not aiming to measure Warframe's success with its latest expansion in terms of concurrent player counts and like. I'm only interested in the execution side of things. And in efforts to make a thorough analysis, I want to share the research I've done on roguelikes first, so that we'd all have better context before actually getting to Duviri. You may already be familiar with what a roguelike game or genre is, but stick with me because I think you'll still find things like the Berlin interpretation to be eye-opening. Generally, roguelikes are a subgenre of RPGs that usually have elements like character creation, procedurally generated dungeons or levels, turn-based gameplay alongside grid-based movement, and of course, permanent death that forces a complete restart to the beginning. One of the first games of this type was a relatively simple ASCII-based program called Rogue, which of course became the namesake of the genre, even though it was technically predated by Beneath Apple Manor, a game coded for the Apple II. Understandable, as Apple-like does not sound like an interesting game genre to me. But Rogue had a winning formula. Its ability to keep players engaged through dungeons that felt new each time, and of course the inclusion of a leaderboard, only served to proliferate its audience. The rapid success and popularity led to variations that were then termed roguelike, games like NetHack, Moria, and Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup. With this quickly expanding catalog of games that attempted to mimic Rogue's success with their own flavors thrown into the mix, fans of the genre and developers alike were concerned that roguelikes would get watered down into something that did not resemble the original formula. And while the exact definition of what a roguelike is remains a point of debate even today, an attempt was made to overcome this. You'd think that back in 2008 that even gamers would be more concerned with the state of the world than segregating themselves from filthy Diablo players. This is sort of a half joke, as gamers and developers did actually come together for the International Roguelike Development Conference held in Berlin. Obviously I was not present there back in 2008, but I could imagine them just wanting to prevent Diablo from being crowned the best roguelike game of all time, as it was heresy to have multiplayer or something. Anyways, the outcome of that conference was the Berlin Interpretation, a list of high and low value factors to help distinguish between pure roguelikes like NetHack from Diablo type stuff. With that said, it was however also agreed in said interpretation that missing some of the factors didn't mean a game was eliminated from being classed as a roguelike, nor did meeting all the criteria described qualify the game as being roguelike. Titles that implemented some of the hallmark features like procedural generation and permadeath while fusing mechanics from other genres like shooters were termed as roguelite. Didn't know gamers could be so political. This is the original 1980s Rogue, and while it may seem like nothing is going on, I am in fact trying my best to play this while referring to the massive list of controls, a lot of which are not available on my main keyboard, so I had to go and get an old full-sized Logitech MK120. After spending what felt like an eternity learning how to actually perform basic commands that were evidently too much for my brain at 3 AM, Rogue felt refreshing. Kind of like a 7-day detox after weeks of deep-fried garbage is the best way I could put it. Playing a game knowing it had no ulterior motives to sell me a skin or booster felt pretty good for a change. Much was the same with NetHack, as it was basically Rogue, but better. In fact, it was a lot better since I got to play as a female samurai this time. The controls were still overwhelming, and I am glad that we have largely moved on from requiring full-sized keyboards for gaming these days. Yeesh. Fast forward a bit to Hades, and I have nothing but good things to say. It made quick work of convincing me that the gameplay throughout was going to be about as well put together as a modern-day roguelike or roguelite could be. Beautiful and consistent graphics, responsive controls, and a gameplay loop that didn't get in your way, so to speak. I understand the hype surrounding this game now. It's incredible, and if you're tired of the recent releases, give Hades a try. I think we can all agree at this point that Duviri is very much a roguelite. That of course does not mean it is bad or in any way inferior to a pure roguelike. It's just built different with the potential to even be better. But is Duviri good enough to stand on its own merits to help sell Warframe to new players as a game worth investing time into? Or is it just another, hopefully not, soon-to-be isolated content island? Well, after having spent weeks negotiating with that privacy-violating owl, setting the pavement across the map on fire, and having extended intellectual sessions with a rabbit, I have to say, Duviri to me feels like a project that got cut down and simplified at some point during development for the sake of cost and meeting deadlines and whatnot. I'm not saying this is what happened, it just feels that way to me. For starters, the world of Duviri is not procedurally generated. I really wish it was, but I also understand that it would have been a massive undertaking even for a big game studio. Not something I'd disqualify Warframe for from being classed as a roguelite, but having distinctly different environments, especially for each emotion cycle, would have made more of an impact than just different skybox colors. And speaking of impact, it is also a little lacking when fighting against the Dags. The enemies do flinch when you set them on fire, as most things would, I imagine, and do get knocked off their feet by power attacks, but there's a clear lack of fluidity from one swing to the next. The Eden does feel good to use, I suppose, but overall melee combat is not on the level I'd like it to be. The animations almost look uncomfortable for the Drifter to perform. I guess saving the world with a rheumatoid arthritis is not easy. However, it wouldn't surprise me if most players couldn't care less about melee combat, as it doesn't take long for the game to turn into a repeating reenactment of Harrison Ford in Cairo. Warframe, the Indiana Jones Paradox. And after a while of gunning down decks, you'll realize that Duviri is just another questline that involves a lot of back and forth between two set locations, the open world and the Undercroft. There are no dungeons or the sort of simple linear progression you'd see in a Dark Souls game. Duviri is exactly as it seems from afar on horseback, surface level, and completely void of anything underneath. Especially once you're done with the Oreworm boss, all you're left with really is to wander the surface and complete chores for intrinsics. I don't believe anyone plays a roguelike solely to collect power-ups and stat boosts, even if permanent. The focus should be, in my opinion, on encouraging new playthroughs with not necessarily different outcomes, but different ways of getting there. As it is, Duviri is set on rails like pretty much other game modes and levels in Warframe. This, alongside the very unpolished feeling of getting thrown back into the Orbiter or Dormizone if you do so wish to start a new run with a different frame or weapon combination perhaps, really does not do Duviri any favors. No one wants to sit through 2 or 3 loading screens. And I know Pablo from the dev team did address why they designed Teshin's Cave the way it is instead of being a hub like Fortuna or the Necrolisk. I do still hope they redesign it at some point in the future. Why couldn't an update that maybe got 5 years of dev time not implement something seen in the Angels of Zariman, which was far more recent? Maybe Duviri could not be too good. I know that sounds silly, but hear me out. If Warframe had an overwhelmingly amazing roguelite in the Duviri Paradox, that would set up new players for disappointment down the road, as much of the game is quite distinct and far from roguelike. And believe me, it is a long road ahead for any player starting today. I do also genuinely have concerns for Warframe's player retention. I mean, more new players that stick around for longer is going to be good for everyone, but if someone new decides to jump in because they heard of the Duviri Paradox from a friend or saw an ad on YouTube, only to discover DE's presentation is lukewarm at best, I don't think it's unreasonable to imagine that player leaving to go play another game and never returning because of that less than stellar first impression. Of course, Duviri might have turned out to be a massive success once all the metrics are released in about a month or so and changes implemented, though the player count on Steam as of now does not indicate anything of that sort. All that said, I did actually really enjoy parts of Duviri. Having to go back and use warframes and weapons I've sort of abandoned, figuring out how to compensate for the lack of DPS or crowd control abilities with my builds, and trying to synergize my setup with my teammates' setup, that was quite a positive experience. I just wish this hotly anticipated update was left baking for a little longer and maybe had a couple more ingredients added early on so it didn't come out feeling bland and lacking flavor in key areas. I don't know, maybe my taste buds are dead. Have you personally enjoyed Duviri so far? Of course, no one enjoys bugs, and while there were a lot of them on launch day, I did not find it to be severe to the level of Angels of Zariman. Kinda like raisins on a cupcake for me, doesn't ruin it, but I'd really rather not have wrinkly grapes. I think I may need to get food now. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, I do read them, and the really funny ones get a heart. Or you could join me on Discord, which is available to everyone through the link in the description. Patreon and the merch store also help support content like this. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Have a good day.